Well, hello there. Welcome back to Planet America. I'm John Barron.
And I'm Chaz Licciardello.
A cracker of a show for you tonight. Presidential candidate Cornel West is with us. Polls suggest the progressive independent could take enough votes away from Joe Biden to help re-elect Donald Trump.
Also this week, major dropouts and major drop-ins into the 2024 campaign. And America finally has a House Speaker. Yay! But not everyone is a fan of Maga Mike. But first...
And there was some big campaign news this week.
Former Vice President Mike Pence has dropped out of the 2024 presidential race.
The former congressman, Indiana governor and vice president suspended his presidential campaign. The announcement was unexpected, yet not a total surprise.
Traveling across the country over the past 6 months, I came here to say it's become clear to me. This is not my time.
His announcement came in the unlikely setting of Las Vegas at the annual Republican Jewish Coalition Leadership Summit. He was struggling to meet the donor requirements for next week's third presidential debate, and his polls were flatlining.
So after much prayer and deliberation, I have decided to suspend my campaign for president effective today.
Mike Pence's decision to be Donald Trump's vice presidential running mate in 2016 helped to legitimise the businessman in the eyes of establishment Republicans and reassure evangelical Christians. His decision not to quit the campaign after the Access Hollywood scandal probably salvaged Donald Trump's White House hopes. After 4 years of fealty and enabling of Trump, Pence finally stood up to his boss on January 6, 2021, when he refused to illegally stop Joe Biden being recognised by Congress as the new president. Ironically, that defiance in defence of democracy doomed Pence's presidential bid. As he dropped out of the presidential race, Mike Pence articulated the choice, still confronting Republicans in this primary election.
Will Republicans continue to be the party of the traditional conservatives that has defined our movement over the past 40 years? Or will our party follow the siren song of populism unmoored to conservative principles?
Yeah, I don't know, Chaz. I suspect that Mike Pence's failure in this campaign suggests the answer to that question is probably very much the latter.
Yeah, I got to say, I don't think Pence was keeping any movement alive during this campaign. John, he's barely keeping himself alive. I think you could argue possibly that Pence was already done back in 2016 when Trump pulled him off the scrap heap, to be honest. Politico headline when Trump got him back in 2016 said it all. Trump flirts with unpopular Pence. At the time, Pence's job approval as Indiana governor was only 40%. And since then, I don't think Pence has been popular for one moment. Pretty much the only thing he added during this entire campaign was this ick moment during the last debate.
And when you have the President of the United States sleeping with a member of the teachers union, there is no chance that you could take the stranglehold away from the teachers union every day.
Full disclosure, Chris, you mentioned the president's situation. My wife isn't a member of the teachers union, but I got to admit, I've been sleeping with a teacher for 38 years. And so full disclosure.
Look at Christy here. Isn't he loving the game?
Oh, what would Mother have to say?
If looks could kill. But at least Pence didn't overstay his welcome. Tim Scott.
Yeah, the door is that way, Timbo. Interesting, though, that Mike Pence did not endorse any other candidate. Nikki Haley spoke right after Mike Pence's surprise announcement, and suddenly she had some nice things to say about her former rival.
He has fought for America, and he has fought for Israel, and we all owe him a debt of gratitude.
So, Chaz, it is time to dust off the old game. Let's take Mike Pence off the board. There he goes.
Yeah, and just for once, one of the Guess Who characters on our board looks like an actual Guess Who character. Here, Mike.
Well, that's a job he could run for. Now, there was an interesting poll out of the state of Iowa this week. Iowa, of course, is the first state to vote for the Republican presidential nominee in mid-January next year, and it does have an outsized influence on the race. This poll from the Des Moines Register's iconic polls to Ann Seltzer is the gold standard in the Hawkeyes state, and it has Donald Trump still leading by 27 points, gaining 1 point since the last Register poll back in August. But the big story is Nikki Haley, surging 10 points to to be tied now with Ron DeSantis in second place. Both DeSantis and the aforementioned Senator Tim Scott are losing ground in Iowa. Also worth noting briefly as well that another Republican dropped out this week. You probably didn't even know who's running. Talk show host Larry Elder has gone. Bye-bye, Larry. Larry failed to qualify for the first two Republican debates. He was one of the Trumpier of Trump rivals there, Chaz. He immediately endorsed Donald Trump's campaign as well.
Sorry, is Doug Burgum still on the Guess Who board?
Is that who that is?
I can't believe he's still running.
Yeah, extraordinary. Meanwhile, there was a significant development on the other side of politics this week as well.
Democratic Congressman Dean Phillips from Minnesota just filed for president in the New Hampshire primary.
Yes, that's right. Joe Biden has his first official rival for the Democratic nomination to have actually served in elected political office. Congressman Dean Phillips, a low-profile member of the House of Representatives whose family fortune apparently comes from schnapps and gelato, he says that while he has been a supporter of Joe Biden, he thinks that at 80, Joe's just too old to run for a second four-year term. Phillips says he actually wanted somebody else to run against Joe Biden, but he's now calling for generational change.
I think President Biden has done a spectacular job for our country, but it's not about the past. This is an election about the future. I will not sit still. I will not be quiet in the face of numbers that are so clearly saying that we're going to be facing an emergency next November.
And when he talks about an emergency next November, here is what Phillips is talking about, Chaz. Donald Trump leading Joe Biden in the average of general election polls by almost a point this week. 3 polls in the last month, though, had Trump 4 points ahead of Biden. Those 91 indictments haven't hurt Trump yet, and maybe they're even helping him.
It even gets worse for the Democrats than that, John. Over the last 45 polls between Biden and Trump, Biden is led by 1 point or less in 40 of them, 40 out of the 45. And remember, he needs a big victory to win the election because of how the Electoral College works. The last election, he won the popular vote by 5 points, and that was barely enough to get him over the line. But there has been a lot of head-scratching about why Dean Phillips would undermine Biden, given that Phillips has a 100% voting record of being with Joe Biden. Dean Phillips says he's not trying to undermine Biden.
I'm not running against Joe Biden. I'm not running against President Biden. I'm running for the future.
Phillips reckons there was an open secret amongst House Democrats that Biden's inner circle was giving them the word it was not a case of if, but when Biden would announce he was not running for re-election. But then Biden ran anyway, and his polling is awful. So Phillips reckons his primary campaign will either prompt Biden to drop out or sharpen him up to be a better re-election candidate. Phillips says, I want to strengthen Biden. I won't quit until I strengthen him. I do not intend to undermine Biden or demean him or diminish him, attack him or embarrass him. Fine. So, why then, on day one, was Phillips going after Joe Biden on his weak spot, border policy? It's hard to see how any of this helps Biden, especially given the reason that Biden's been particularly struggling in the polls lately is because his job approval amongst Democrats has tumbled 11 points in the last month. That's the worst Democratic approval of his presidency by some way. And why is that? Gallup's in no doubt it's related to Biden's strong support of Israel after the Hamas attacks. Some Democrats disagree with Biden on that. But Phillips is even more hawkish on Israel than Biden is. So Phillips is absolutely not the answer, no matter what the question is. By the way, he's not the only new candidate either. Political YouTuber Cenk Uygur has also joined the Democratic primary for similar stated reasons as Dean Phillips. But the fact that you haven't even mentioned him yet, John, I think is a great indication exactly how much impact Cenk is making on this race.
Yes, that and the fact that that not-so-young Turk was literally born in Turkey and therefore is legally not allowed to be president of the United States. So there is that too. Adding to Joe Biden's worries right now, though, a more serious challenger from the left, philosopher, historian and political activist Professor Cornel West is running as an independent presidential candidate. Now, we showed you this poll last week that had Biden and Trump tied head-to-head, but once you put Cornel West into the mix, he takes enough progressive supporters away from Biden to hand victory to Donald Trump.
Yeah, and it wouldn't be lost on Democrats that back in the year 2000, Cornel West broke from the Democrats then as well to be a Ralph Nader supporter. And Ralph Nader ended up winning 1.6% of the vote in Florida, a state where Bush won by 537 votes, and that was why he won the election. And so Nader probably cost Al Gore the presidency.
Yeah, thanks for the war on terror, Ralph.
Yeah, so Cornel West would be well familiar with that history, and yet here he is.
Indeed he is. We've got all sorts of questions to ask, so let's get the answers from the man himself, Professor Cornel West. A warm welcome to Planet America.
I'm very blessed to be here, and it's always a pleasure to know I'm speaking to my brothers and sisters of all colors in Australia.
So why are you running for President of the United States? Do you believe that you can actually be elected, or is this campaign about something else?
I do think I have a chance to win. I think that there's a good chance that Biden will run out of gas and that Trump might be on the way to jail. So you don't really know in real time where things are. Most importantly, you want to hold on to your integrity, honesty, decency. You want to be morally consistent, and you want to present to the American people at least an alternative to the corporate duopoly, to the two-party system that is so tied to big money and big military spending.
Professor, we know it's incredibly difficult to break up the political duopoly. So rather than campaigning for president, why not campaign to change the system? Maybe institute some kind of preferential voting system. So that way, third parties of the future might have a genuine shot of breaking up the political duopoly.
Well, it's a good question. No, I mean, we're doing that for 50 years in terms of calling for ranked choice voting and proportional representation, but those issues have to go hand in hand with issues like the abolition of poverty, the abolition of homelessness, have to get the corporate greed under control, trying to deal with climate catastrophe, so that it's hard to separate these issues when you're trying to deal with a decrepit two-party system. But I hear what you're saying, though. It's been something that I've been concerned about since 1970s.
Professor, we've seen those national polls that suggest that you being in the race could hand the election to Donald Trump. There are some swing state polls that show the same thing. How do you feel about that possibility?
Well, one, I'm speaking primarily to the 40% of U.S. citizens who do not vote at all. We only have about 58% or so of U.S. citizens who even bother to go to the polls. And then for those who vote outside of the corporate duopoly, there's another 65% that say they would never, ever, ever vote for Democrats or Republicans when they vote for independents like myself and others. Now, whether in fact in the end that means I'm a quote unquote spoiler or not, if Biden can't convince his fellow citizens to vote for him, then that's not my fault.
If I could ask, Professor, what happened at the Greens to make you change your mind about running on their ticket?
Well, it became just too difficult to jump through all of the hoops that they have. They have a number of different state conventions you have to be a part of. They wanted 4 debates just within the Green Party, in addition to all the traveling I was already doing. I decided I wanted to spend much more time directly connecting with the people and fellow citizens rather than spending some of that significant amount of time within the Green Party in order to obtain their nomination. But once I could see very clearly what was required, I said, no, I'm a jazz man. It's hard to be in a party band when you're a jazz man. I'm going to have to be much freer. I've got to be much more able to raise my voice on my own terms.
Cornel West, after the 2016 election, we learned a lot about Russian attempts to get Donald Trump elected by damaging Hillary Clinton, by also supporting the Greens candidate Jill Stein. How do you feel about the prospect of your campaign being promoted by foreign and nefarious interests like that? And is there any way to guard against that?
Well, I mean, I don't know anything about it, though. I'm a free Black man. I'm an independent candidate. I'm unbossed. I'm unbought. I'm going to speak what's on my mind, and I don't view myself ever being either manipulated by or used by anybody or any party or any country. So in that regard, I think that the Russians, and they've got their own vicious forms of repression and domination. Of course, Putin himself has been a gangster for a long, long time. I don't think they'd want to get too close to me. But it is also true that I've got my critiques of U.S. policy vis-a-vis the Ukraine. And I do believe the expansion of NATO was a major factor in the criminal invasion of the Ukraine. And so that it could be that behind my back or unconsciously, they might be attempting to do X or Y. But if I'm mindful of it, I would be highly critical of it.
In 2020, both you and your friend Bernie Sanders ultimately supported Joe Biden's presidential campaign. This time, Bernie Sanders is again supporting Joe Biden, and he says, I love Cornel West, but he should not be running this campaign. How do you feel about that?
Well, Brother Bernie Sanders is my dear brother. I have a deep love for him, too. We have a deep disagreement at the moment. I find it very difficult at the moment to even entertain the thought of supporting Biden. One, because I don't think he's going to be the candidate. As I said before, I think he's going to run out of gas. It will be somebody else. But two, I mean, you know, when you support somebody who is, you know, an architect of mass incarceration regime, supporter of invasion and occupation of Iraq, tied to the death of nearly 500,000 Iraqis, and now with the Middle East, the supporter of a genocidal assault on Palestinians and is unapologetic about it. It makes it difficult to vote for somebody like that, I must say. And I'm not the only one who thinks and feels this way.
Good to talk to you, Cornel West. Thanks for being with us on Planet America.
Thank you, my brother.
It's March 12th, 1968, the day of the first in the nation New Hampshire primary. Democratic President Lyndon Johnson is running for a second term at the height of the Vietnam War. He's being challenged for his party's nomination by Minnesota Senator Eugene McCarthy, a bookish anti-war candidate.
I'm concerned that the administration seems to have set no limit to the price which it's willing to pay for a military victory.
Few see McCarthy as a serious threat to LBJ's re-election, but as the New Hampshire ballots are counted, McCarthy comes within 8 points of Johnson. 4 days later, Senator Robert Kennedy, who also opposes the war, enters the primary contest against Johnson and McCarthy.
I am announcing today my candidacy for the presidency of the United States.
A fortnight later, LBJ stuns the nation with an announcement of his own.
I will not accept the nomination of my party for another term as your president.
After Johnson's exit, McCarthy and Kennedy continued their campaigns. Kennedy won the June 5th California primary, giving him the upper hand heading to the party convention.
Now it's on to Chicago and let's win there. Thank you very much.
Moments later, though, Kennedy is shot.
Get the gun, Raper. Okay, now hold on to the guy. Hold on to him.
Robert Kennedy died the following day. Eugene McCarthy, though, did not have enough delegates to become the Democratic nominee. The party bosses fell in line behind the Vice President, Hubert Humphrey, who went on to lose the presidency that November to Richard Nixon. It was a sequence of events, all begun by Eugene McCarthy's better-than-expected second place in the New Hampshire primary of 1968. Well, after more than 3 weeks of infighting, the Republican Party finally elected a new Speaker late last week. He's 51-year-old Louisiana Representative Mike Johnson, the fourth and final nominee put forward after the unprecedented sacking of Kevin McCarthy. The result was read out by a much relieved Patrick McHenry, the not-so-temporary Speaker pro tempore.
The Honourable Mike Johnson of the state of Louisiana has received 220 votes.
And so it's time to get back to work.
I want to thank you all for the trust that you have instilled in me to lead us in this historic and unprecedented moment that we're in. The challenge before us is great, but the time for action is now.
And those challenges include finding a way to pass a budget to stop the government shutting down in the middle of the month and see if the House can agree somehow on funding for Israel and Ukraine. Johnson got this bit of encouragement from former President Trump, who didn't formally endorse him but did let it be known that he was favoured.
Great speech today from new Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson. Off to a terrific start.
And Trump even had a new nickname for the Speaker.
Maga Mike Johnson.
But plenty of people are asking, who is Maga Mike, the low-key lawyer from Louisiana?
Well, if you work it out, just to let Republican Senator Susan Collins know, because she told a reporter she had to Google Mike Johnson to find out who he was.
Well, this is what Mike Johnson has to say about Mike Johnson.
Someone asked me today in the media, they said, it's curious, people are curious, what does Mike Johnson think about any issue under the sun? I said, well, go pick up a Bible off your shelf and read it. That's my worldview. That's what I believe.
Yeah, I'm not sure. That's probably bad news for Donald Trump. The Bible does say something about death to adulterers. But look, there are some other things that Mike believes. The former constitutional lawyer opposes marriage equality, claiming in 2004 that homosexual relationships are inherently unnatural. He argued your race, creed and sex are what you are, while homosexuality and cross-dressing are things you do.
Yeah, I've got an even better one than that, John. In 2004, Johnson wrote, experts project that homosexual marriage is the dark harbinger of chaos and sexual anarchy that could doom even the strongest republic. That is one freaky projection from the experts, John.
Yeah, although it is a great name for a band, I reckon. Sexual Anarchy with Mike Johnson.
I reckon Matt Gaetz is in that band.
Yeah, probably now. When he was running for Congress back in 2016, Mike Johnson signed the Congressional Term Limits Pledge to vote for a 3 House term limit. And 2 years ago, he was honoured with a plaque for his support of term limits on Congress. And then last year, he ran for a 4th term in Congress. We don't know if he's given the plaque back or not. One of the other things he believes, by the way, is in 2020, the election was stolen from Donald Trump. He argued that Biden's win was bogus because some states' officials had changed voting procedures during the coronavirus pandemic without legislature's approval. In other words, they expanded early and postal voting to try and save lives, but that doesn't wash with Mike. Meanwhile, back at the White House, reporters asked President Biden if he was concerned that as Speaker, Johnson might try and invalidate the legitimate outcome of next year's elections too. Turns out, Biden's not worried.
Just like I was not worried that the last guy would be able to overturn the election. They had about 60 lawsuits and all the way to the Supreme Court, and every time they lost. I understand the Constitution.
Yeah, I gotta say, I'm not sure what Johnson actually believes, John, because he seems to have a certain flexibility about his beliefs, if you ask me. His actual voting record, it's on the right side of the Republican mainstream, but not by much. If you have a look at the graph there, the right half of the Republicans, he's right in the middle there. He's travelling with a pack. As far as issues go, though, let's talk Ukraine, for instance. He's been voting against Ukraine funding since May 2022, when he said, quote, we should not be sending another $40 billion abroad when our border is in chaos, American mothers are struggling to find baby formula, etc., 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 without sufficient oversight over where the money will go. Whereas now that he's Speaker, he's saying this.
Now, we can't allow Vladimir Putin to prevail in Ukraine because I don't believe it would stop there, and it would probably encourage and empower China to perhaps make a move on Taiwan. We have these concerns. We're not going to abandon them, but we have a responsibility, a stewardship responsibility over the precious treasure of the American people.
Now, that is not a direct contradiction because he's still talking about oversight and accountability for the money. But the point of emphasis, very different. What about abortion? He used to support a nationwide abortion ban after 20 weeks of pregnancy. He used to be very pro-life. But now abortion bans are on the nose and he's offering a more nuanced position.
We argued my entire career for 25 years that the states should have the right to do this. There's no national consensus among the people on what to do with that issue on a federal level for certain.
Once again, not a direct contradiction. Just a very different emphasis. I reckon this guy is a real politician, John. He'll believe in whatever he needs to believe in.
Yeah, it's a very Trump-era politician's skill to be slightly different for whatever an audience wants to hear in that moment and somehow get away with it. Meanwhile, Mike Johnson has unveiled a very partisan bill this week with a plan to provide $14.3 billion in aid to Israel, but getting the money by cutting funding for the Internal Revenue Service, taking money from tax collectors to support a close ally. We'll see how that goes down with Biden district Republicans, the Democrat-controlled Senate, and indeed the White House itself. The state of the US economy, more than any other issue, is often the decisive factor in American presidential elections. A weak economy doomed the re-elections of Jimmy Carter in 1980 and George Bush in 1992, and was one of the reasons why voters rejected Donald Trump 3 years ago. Well, Trump is now arguing things were actually great then and terrible now.
Everything is more expensive, a lot more expensive actually, because of Joe Biden's reckless policies that have caused soaring energy costs and currency inflation like our country hasn't seen for over 50 years.
But when it comes to the state of the US economy, it really depends on who you ask. Influential Australian-born economist Justin Wolfers has a rather different take.
This economy is going gangbusters, and it's time for the doomers to apologise for being consistently wrong for 2 years.
So what's the story, Chaz?
The story is Justin Wolfers should be a voiceover artist.
He's pretty good, isn't he?
But he's also right about the doomers. Bloomberg's model at the beginning of the year put the chance of a recession in 2023 at 100%.
Okay.
And yet with only a quarter left in the year, the American economy is rocketing along at a rate of 4.9%. That is the fastest rate in 2 years, even while the Federal Reserve is trying to hit the brakes through interest rate hikes. That's not the only good news either. The survey of consumer finances has just come out, and that found that the median family's net worth has jumped 37% in 3 years to $192,000. That's including inflation, by the way. Even better, that extra wealth that's been created is being spread more evenly as well. This graph here is hard to explain. Essentially, the higher the line is, the more the inequality there is. So wealth inequality peaked in 2016 and it's going down. It's become rapidly more equal since then. Some good news for women as well. Their participation rate in the workforce is now breaking all-time records at 77.7%. Although that probably isn't so much about Biden as it's more about the ability to work from home. This is the Zoom era. And if you look at the graph here, the women who are really doing well are those with kids younger than 5 years old. That's the glowing line on the bottom. You can see those guys are smashing workforce participation records in the Zoom era at the end of the graph there, as are people with a disability. Once again, working from home has freed up a whole new workforce, and the economy is the beneficiary. So does that mean that everyone's going to start celebrating the new economy? Woo! Probably not. 30-year fixed mortgage rates are still at 8%. They're the highest levels since the year 2000, and people don't like that very much at all. Then there's also inflation, which is now pretty much at normal levels, but those higher prices aren't just going to disappear. Since Biden was inaugurated, price levels have risen 16%. And even with higher wages, no one's enjoying that either. Eventually, though, people will notice the upsides of the economy, and that will be good for Biden, just like it was good for Bill Clinton all those years ago, back in 1994. Support for Clinton's handling of the economy was only in the low 40s, but yeah, things picked up. And after only 3.5 years of continued growth, in mid-1996, the public then started to consistently give him high economic ratings. So it is going to be a long haul for Biden, no matter what Justin Wolfers says in his beautiful voice, especially given some industries haven't bounced back at all, like, for instance, the tourism industry. International tourism arrivals, they're still 26% below pre-pandemic levels. Maybe what they need is some kind of promotional campaign. I just hope they find a better promotional campaign than this.
Fox News Travel wants you to
go to San Francisco.
Just listen to our San Fran enthusiasts.
San Francisco turned itself into a cemetery, and just bags of flesh mutating on the sidewalks.
Flesh bags!
Worse than Ukraine, worse than Afghanistan, worse than everything else.
Worse than everything!
In San Francisco, they fornicate and they defecate and they do everything in front of our kids.
Bring the kids. Then pack your flesh bags, because we're heading to Seattle.
Jesse sent Johnny to the progressive hellscape.
Hellscape!
It was 2 days of total misery.
Total misery! Then on to Portland.
You know about all the drugged out zombies living in tents? Now they're trying to eat people.
Don't forget Vermont.
Sex offenders go to places like Vermont.
And of course, New York City.
This city is disgusting, but the voters control this.
New York City?
No, we're talking about San Francisco.
The USA. Come for the
crime, homelessness, violence.
Stay for the
filth.
Brought to you by the Fox News Board of Tourism.
Yeah, maybe if they'd worked Mickey Mouse in there, it would have helped. That's it for Planet America. We'll be back at the same time next week. And don't forget to join us on Friday night, 8 o'clock Eastern Time on ABC News for a Fireside Chat.
Where we're going to have more interviews, more news, lots of chat. You can find both shows and longer interviews on ABC iView, YouTube and Facebook. And don't forget the Pet Podcast right there.
Bye-bye.